Good morning and welcome to the August 24th, 2023 Law and Regulation Committee meeting. I will now call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to take the roll.
Vice Mayor Bernasconi.
Here.
Councilmember Mendonça.
Here. All right, thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to ask our Government Relations Administrator, Mark Walensky, to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, at this time, I will open it up for public comments, and this is for anything that is not listed on this morning's agenda. Seeing none, I will close public comments. We'll move on to item 5 on our agenda, which is the minutes from our prior meeting. Again, open for public comment on the minutes. We'll close public comment on the minutes. Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any amendments or comments on the June 22nd minutes?
No changes.
Awesome. At this time, I will reflect the consensus to approve the June 22nd minutes.
We'll let the minutes reflect that the committee has consensus to approve the June 22 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 6.1, state and federal priority legislation, and I will turn it over to our Government Relations Administrator, Mark Walensky.
Thank you, Chairman Donza and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. The following report includes an overview of several bills in areas of particular concern on public safety, homelessness, housing, public works, and at the federal level, the appropriations process. Joining me for the presentation is Robert Cara, the program manager for the city. As a reminder, this year's session ends on September 14th, and the governor has until October 14th to sign or veto bills that make it to his desk. With respect to public safety, I'll turn the presentation over to Rob.
Thanks, Mark. The government relations team continues to monitor several bills during the current legislative session. In this report, we're going to highlight 4 bills that have successfully navigated the process and have become law. As Mark mentioned, the next critical milestone is September 1st, marking the day for fiscal committees to meet and report on bills. First, California AB 925, vehicle removal and expired registration. This introduces new regulations regarding removing vehicles due to expired registration tags. This bill mandates that a peace officer or designated traffic enforcement employee must verify the absence of current registration through DMV records before removing a vehicle. Now, it's important to note this is our current practice, but it puts into law now the process for which we can remove vehicles. We will monitor the implementation of this as we go forward. We don't anticipate a huge impact, but it does put another layer in place now that officers will have to go through before removing vehicles due to expired registration. Next is AB 946, Emergency Services Endangered Missing Advisory. This expands our ability to authorize requests for an activation of an EMA, or an Endangered Missing Advisory, in cases involving missing persons at risk. The advisory provides a swift notification to the public, pushing information widely across the area, across the state, and the adjustments to 946 and the EMA is adding in criteria regarding developmentally disabled individuals, cognitively impaired individuals, abducted individuals, or a very broad term of self-care challenged individuals. This bill does align with our commitment to public safety, and it is just an adjustment of practice for us to be able to use this EMA now in an expanded capacity. AB 1740, Human Trafficking Notice Pediatric Care Facilities. So AB 1740 extends the requirements for businesses and establishments to display notices related to human trafficking in facilities that provide pediatric care. While there's no direct impact on our organization, we do support this initiative because it could potentially put one more space of information where if someone is experiencing human trafficking, they have one more resource to be able to get that information. There may be a space where we are responsible for providing that information or helping to find a way to put more of that information out there. But it's just expanding now by law where information should be posted regarding human trafficking. And the final bill I'll cover is SB 376, and it's regarding human trafficking and victims' rights. 376 introduces a new element to victims who may be experiencing human trafficking in the investigative process. Now, law enforcement and prosecutors are now required to inform victims about their rights to have a human trafficking advocate and a chosen support person present during initial interviews. Now, this is under our current practice. We do this as we contact individuals who may be victims of human trafficking, but this is now moving into law where we have to provide that to somebody who may be experiencing human trafficking. So slight adjustment to the investigative process and interviewing individuals in this space. Again, holistically, we support this move to try to get more information to somebody who may be experiencing human trafficking. In conclusion, the enactment of these bills signifies our evolving landscape just around law enforcement, the changes that we continue to foresee downrange. We will continue to partner as the government relations team with our state lobbying firm and closely with our trade organizations, Cal Chiefs. I'll turn it back over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Rob. Moving on to homelessness, and I'll also let the committee know that all of the bills that I'll be reporting on have previously been brought forward to the committee and been presented to the committee. Assembly Bill 67, this bill would create the Homeless Courts Pilot Program, which would be administered by the Judicial Council. The city's taken a watch position on the bill to understand the opportunities that would be provided if the bill was passed into law. The Homeless Court Pilot Program would allow local jurisdictions to create diversion programs for unhoused individuals charged with infractions, misdemeanors, or low-level nonviolent felonies. It's modeled after several other successful homeless courts in the state, which have proven to reduce barriers to services and divert unhoused residents from an overcrowded county jail system. Current status is in the Senate Committee on Appropriations. Excuse me. Assembly Bill 799. This bill would enact the Homelessness Accountability Act, and it specifies that the purpose of the Housing Assistance and Prevention Program to provide ongoing grant funds to support regional coordination and expand or develop local capacity to address their immediate homelessness challenges. The city has also taken a watch position on this bill to better understand what new opportunities might exist to those that are unhoused in Roseville if the bill were enacted. The status of this bill is in the Senate Committee on Appropriations on suspense. With respect to housing, two bills include Senate Bill 482. The bill would require the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, to offer capitalized operating reserves to supportive housing units developed under the multifamily housing program. The city has taken a support position on the bill for the benefits that would occur by requiring HCD to offer these capitalized operating reserves through the multifamily housing programs. These reserves are fundamental in guaranteeing that critically needed affordable housing development projects for homelessness housing can be built. Status of this bill is that it's in the Assembly Committee on Appropriations. And the final housing bill is AB 519. This bill would require the Department of Housing and Community Development the California Housing Finance Agency, the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, and the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee to jointly convene an affordable housing finance work group to develop a consolidated application for housing developers to use to obtain grants, loans, tax credit, tax-exempt bonds, credit enhancements, and federal funds as applicable, and other types of financing for building affordable housing. The city has taken a support position on the bill for the help this process could provide to produce additional homes for lower-income Californians. Despite recent one-time funding, the subsidy available to build new affordable homes remains inadequate and oversubscribed to meet housing goals and the needs of lower-income households. By establishing an affordable housing finance work group to create a consolidated application and a streamlined review and approval process, it would help address the affordable housing crisis in the state. The status of this bill is in the Senate Committee on Appropriation. And then with respect to Public Works, two bills are AB 7. This bill would require the project selection process for each transportation project that would be funded at least partially from specified funding sources, including the state highway account, the road maintenance and rehabilitation account, and the trade corridor enhancement account to incorporate in specified principles. The city has taken an opposed position on the bill due to the concerns that the proposed changes would have negative implications on the selection of potential Roseville transportation projects. Status of this bill is in the Senate Committee on Appropriations. And then the final Public Works bill is Senate Bill 617. This bill would authorize a transit district, municipal operator, consolidated agency, joint powers authorities, regional transportation agency, or local or regional agencies to use the progressive design build process. City has taken a support position on the bill for the cost benefits a progressive design build format would provide for certain types of projects and the benefits it would provide for future city projects. Status of this bill is in the Assembly Committee on Appropriations. And then finally, with respect to at the federal level, so Congress returned from their summer recess the Senate will return on September 5th, followed by the House on Tuesday, September 12th. The Senate Majority Leader has indicated it will be a busy fall that will include keeping the government funded beyond the September 30th government funding deadline. Currently, there are substantial differences between the House of Representatives and the Senate Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and Related Agency, or THUD bill. The House passed their THUD bill in mid-July, and it proposes to cut transportation funding, while the Senate bill, approved July 20th, maintains hardy funding levels. The differences between the House and the Senate transportation funding bills have potential implications for implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as reductions in funding would negatively affect public safety and transportation services. If there is a government shutdown, which from many quarters there's discussion about the likelihood of this increasing, it would begin October 1st if appropriators cannot compromise on the spending bills. The transportation bills alone indicate that common ground may be difficult to reach. And with that, this concludes our presentation, and we're prepared to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rob. At this time, I'll open it up to public comment. Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back up here. Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any questions?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
I had a couple. On AB 946, can you give me just a kind of a description of what self-care challenged? What do they mean by that?
I think it falls in alignment with the preceding 3-4 indicators, and I think they're really looking for anyone, I'll say self-care challenged. Let's use this example of maybe somebody is taking a new medication and they have become somewhat mentally incapacitated, or they're not able to care for themselves. Anything that puts someone in threat of making just a conscious cognitive decision. Very, very broad for this new EMA requirement.
So it's not a new way of saying them being a danger to themselves. That's a distinguishment between the two?
That's not the read that we have on it.
Okay. Just curious. Okay. And then, Mark, on the homelessness court, what types of items would we expect to be brought forward in a court like this?
So as it calls out in the bill, it's for misdemeanors, low-level infractions, and nonviolent felonies.
Okay.
So that's the criteria that it's set up within the language of the bill.
And then what's the success been in other jurisdictions with this?
Well, so I can say here, there's the county's effort has met limited success. But in other jurisdictions, they've had some levels of success, and that's why this bill is using those case studies or those systems that have had success as the foundation for the development of the bill.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay. At this time, we will move on to item 6.2 on our agenda, our electric department priority legislation. And I'll welcome up our Government Relations Administrator, Amber Blix.
Good morning, Chairman Donza, Vice Mayor Bernasconi. We are rounding out the legislative session now with just under a month to go in the state legislation. So today, for today's report, I thought I would give a brief overview of an update on 3 state legislative bills, an update on the California budget and the infrastructure package related to energy, a few of the energy-related bond proposals, and then round it out with some of the federal legislation that we're tracking. So the first bill on state legislation is AB 1061 by Assemblymember Rendon, related to the Electricity Supply Strategic Reliability Reserve Program, which requires facilities constructed by or under contract with the Department of Water Resources, or DWR, to comply with the California Air Resources Board's Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reporting Program and the CARB Cap and Trade Program. Given that DWR has assets located in Roseville and Roseville has contracts with DWR, the electric department is monitoring this bill. But as a practical matter, the GHG emissions programs already apply if certain thresholds are met. This bill is really just explicitly calling it out that it should apply to facilities. So we're continuing to monitor this bill for any potential impacts to Roseville, but the legislation does not require anything new regarding how those programs under the CARB Cap and Trade Program operate. The next bill, SB 664 by Senator Stern, similar bill related to the DWR generation. And this bill really expands upon the items that are required to be reported by the California Energy Commission and the California Public Utilities Commission as part of their Joint Reliability Planning Assessment, JRPA, and that is currently submitted to the legislature quarterly. So this bill really expands the reporting in the JRPA to include fossil fuel use of DWR units. And so the department is continuing to monitor this for any impacts to Roseville, as there are the DWR units in Roseville that Roseville has contracts with. The next bill, SB 308, is a bill that would have created negative emission credits program at CARB on top of the cap and trade program. It would have had unknown potential cost implications to electric utilities, and we were opposing this bill with our trade associations. Happy to report that now this is a 2-year bill, so we don't expect to have to deal with this anymore this year. However, it could come back next year, and if it does, we would continue to oppose it if the same concept was introduced. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about the California budget and the governor's infrastructure package that went through. There were several bills related to each of these issues. I just want to briefly touch on 2 of the bills that were energy related that came out of this. And they weren't, neither the budget nor the infrastructure package were too energy heavy. We are awaiting additional trailer bills that could show up later this year that probably will be more energy intensive or impactful. So the first is SB 123, which is a budget trailer bill. I will note that in the report, it mistakenly says AB 123. It should be SB 123, so we've corrected it here in the presentation. And really what this bill does is requires updated payment methods for newly publicly available EV chargers, and requires the Energy Commission to kind of continually looking at updating those payment methods as technologies change. And then the state also allocated funds to the Self-Generation Incentive Program, the SGIP. And since that program is generally overseen by the California Public Utilities Commission, but since the state allocated funds for that, publicly owned utility customers are eligible for those funds. So we're watching through our trade associations the proceeding at the Public Utilities Commission to see how those funds will be implemented. And then the second bill was part of the infrastructure package, SB 149, dealing with judicial streamlining. And this bill indicates that there'd be a 270-day streamline review process where feasible for infrastructure projects. And the goal here is really to aid in expediting clean energy projects over the next 10 years. The bill does have a sunset date just slightly over 10 years from now. So it's really an effort from the state to kind of get up to speed on some of the clean energy goals and help major infrastructure projects get through. The next bill is a bond proposal, and I will say that there's several bond proposals out there that are being floated around that aren't related to energy. I'm just going to focus on kind of the energy-related ones here. It's AB 1567. We have a watch position on it, and this is a $16 billion climate resilience bond related to water, wildfire prevention, and clean energy. The important part that we're tracking is the $2 billion in funding for clean energy projects, which could include projects for grid modernization and addressing electrification load growth. Through our trade associations, we're requesting equitable distribution of clean energy funding. So that would be that 25% would go towards benefiting POU customers. And the idea there is that POU customers are about 25% of the state's electricity load, so 25% of the funding should be allocated to POU customers. These bond bills require 2/3 vote to pass the legislature, and if it does pass, it will go before the voters at the March 5th, 2024 statewide primary election. The next bond proposal is SB 867 by Allen, a $15.5 billion climate resiliency and natural resource protection bond. Again, this bill has $2 billion in clean energy projects, $2 billion investments for clean energy projects slated, and we're similarly requesting equitable distribution of clean energy funding on this bond proposal as well. This bill is tied to the passage of SB 638 by Eggman and Senator Nilo, and it needs to be enacted by January 1 of 2024. Again, it requires 2/3 vote to pass the legislature, and this will go before voters at the March 5th, 2024 statewide primary election if passed. And then finally, last is SB 638 by Eggman and Nilo, with a watch position on this as well. This bill doesn't have too many energy-related provisions in it, but it is tied to the last bill that I just discussed, SB 867. So both of these bills kind of have to pass for them each to go through. And this bill would go before voters at the November 5th, 2024 statewide general election. Finally is the federal bills that we're watching. Introduced together is Senate Bill 2036 by Barrasso and HR 4167 by Hudson. We've been supporting this bill. These bills, they're identical bills on protecting America's Distribution Transformer Supply Chain Act, and they prohibit the Department of Energy from issuing revised energy efficiency rules for distribution transformers for at least 5 years. The electric department has been involved in extensive outreach related to supply chain issues associated with distribution transformers, even before this rule was proposed. Unfortunately, despite our ongoing advocacy, the Department of Energy has not revised their proposed rule. And really what the impact here is we were already in a supply chain crunch with distribution transformers. Then the DOE introduced this proposed rule, which will kind of require us to retool the manufacturing in terms of the steel that's used for these transformers. So that could increase potential delays that we're already facing. So we've been active on all of these issues in multiple venues at the federal level, and even been bringing it up at the state level as well. So this is an act that we're very supportive of, and we were able to actually see some of the language before it was introduced. So that was very beneficial. And with that, that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Amber. At this time, I'll open it up to public comment. Seeing none, I will close public comment. Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any questions?
Just a question, Amber, and maybe this is even for Mark too, but is there a strategy between what goes on the primary and what goes on the general election in terms of the bonds?
I don't know all the ins and outs of that.
I'm with Amber. I'm not well versed in that, so.
Yeah, okay,
we can
I'm not
definitely-
either, but I'm just curious if there's
Definitely get back.
strategy between March or whenever primaries are to general election November.
We can do a little bit of research on that and get back to you.
No worries, either way. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
I don't have any questions. Let's just hope that DOE changes their mindset on the transformers, because that's a big deal for us.
Yes.
Okay. We'll move on to item 6.3, Environmental Utilities Priority Legislation, and I'll welcome up our Government Relations Administrator, Noelle Maddock. She's already here.
Good morning, Chair Mondanza and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. This morning, I plan to cover state legislation dealing with extended producer responsibility, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which I will from now on refer to as PFAS, and water rights. And then I will wrap up with a couple of federal updates. Most of the bills that I'll be discussing this morning are those that have come before the committee. So I'm not going to dive too deep into all of them, but first I'll cover this morning AB 2, which we have been watching this measure and recently moved to a support position when they accepted amendments to add customer-owned solar panels to the existing electronic waste recycling program. So a positive step forward from their prior proposal. However, the solar panels not owned by customers are still being funneled into an end-of-life plan by the manufacturers. Concerns have been raised recently in committee relating to the costs for the state overseeing and collecting the new recycling fee that would be implemented with the passage of this bill. And then the proposal is still not a traditional EPR program, as it allows companies to develop their own end-of-life plan. And then over the summer recess, the California Product Stewardship Council, of which we are members of, signed on as a sponsor as they continue to work to get this to be more of a true EPR program. So Roseville is supporting their efforts in this, just due to the financial impact that the proper disposal and recycling has on our fees. The next measure is SB 707, which builds on the success of several pilot programs. The California Product Stewardship Council is also sponsoring this first-of-its-kind textile EPR program. The measure has made it out of its house of origin with minimal opposition, but recently is receiving a little bit more opposition. So the author and sponsors have made this into a 2-year bill, so they can continue to work on the concerns that have recently been expressed. This next measure is a new one to the committee. It is SB 3. When introduced, this bill merely expanded current disconnection of residential water service for non-payment statute to small water systems with less than 200 connections. We expected this bill might get amended and affect the current law, in which it did right before the summer recess. So now the bill is affecting Roseville and other large water purveyors. Currently, current law requires water systems to create a policy with strict notification requirements and limiting the ability to discontinue water service for non-payment in limited circumstances, such as under-resourced individuals as well as those who are medically vulnerable. As amended, it now would prohibit water systems like Roseville from shutting off water for non-payment irrespective of their ability to pay. It provides expanded authority to the Attorney General for new actions that they can take against water systems if we are found violating this new law. Staff is concerned of the potential financial ramifications of this law. We saw the spike of unpaid bills during the pandemic, which is very concerning, and we have fear that should this be passed, we will see the same kind of debt being incurred by residents. We are feeling this is a little premature because the original disconnection law went into effect right when the pandemic hit, so it never was able to really be fully implemented and tested to see if any tweaks or fixes need to be done. So just very concerned over the expansion of this. The next issue, all three of these bills have been heard before the committee. This issue is PFAS, one of my favorite ones. You guys are going to get sick of me talking about it because it is emerging and it's becoming there's more and more attention being placed on it. As regulations are being promulgated at the federal level and the state level, the legislature is continuing to introduce legislation dealing with PFAS. Just as a reminder, PFAS is a substance that our utilities are passive receivers of. Through all of what we do, we are not introducing this chemical into the environment. We're just having to handle it at its end of life. That's why, as part of this year's Roseville's legislative platform, we've taken a proactive approach and said that we would be supporting measures that are trying to prohibit the use of PFAS being used in products. So trying to be a little forward thinking on this. The next issue is water rights, and we've spoken about these before here. I'm happy to report that 2 of the water rights bills, the most egregious ones, have been held and been made into two-year bills. The bill that's moving forward is SB 389. We have been participating as part of an industry coalition, so water, aqua, CMUA. And they recently, due to amendments to SB 389, have been able to move to a neutral. So on the water rights front, very positive forward motion on that. However, through the process working with the legislative staff and legislators, what we did learn is that there's a lot of education that needs to occur with the new legislators as well as staff about California's water rights system. It was very concerning that all of the effort to try and educate. It's not something that a lot of folks follow, and it's a little wonky, so we have our work cut out for us. Next, I will move on to our federal issues, and I believe we've reported, or at least if not verbally as a presentation, we have included it in our report. HR 2964. This is basically putting into federal law California's Do Not Flush law that we talked about, which was AB 818 from 2021. The bill is moving. I just wanted to inform the committee that we did write a letter to our representative Kylie requesting that he join on as a co-author or co-sponsor of this measure. It is something that he did support in the assembly, so we're hoping that he will add his name to this bipartisan federal legislation. And then finally, I just wanted to make you aware of our continued efforts to support the development of the Sacramento Water Bank. Just this last week, in partnership with the Regional Water Authority and Sacramento Suburban Water Agency, Roseville hosted a tour for representatives from the Bureau of Reclamation, the U.S. Geological Survey. We showed off Well 8, and these two agencies will actually play a role in the approval of federal recognition for the Sacramento Water Bank. That federal recognition is important because it just frees up and makes the ability of using the federal water easier. So overall, very positive momentum for the water bank. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'll open up to public comment. Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back up here. Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any questions?
No questions, just a comment about thanking you for your watchful eye on behalf of the businesses and residents in our city. All of you who do that.
Yeah, I agree. I love a good PFAS update on a Thursday morning. It's great. Okay, so we have come to the end of our agenda. I will open it up for one last public comment. I will close public comments. Any comments from up here at the dais? No? Okay, well, that is it for today. Our next meeting will be on September 28th, and look forward to you joining us then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.